What is shaken, Internet? This is Salt's bringing you the How to Tank for Dummies Protection Paladin Guide. This guide is targeted at newer tanks that are just trying to learn how to be paladins, and will cover the talents, abilities, and general playstyle of Protection Paladin tanks. If you're looking for the very basics of tanking in general, click on the annotation in the video right here to get a brief overview of all things tanking. If you're looking for how to tank specific dungeon or raid content, click on the annotation in the video here to access my specific guides. If you're just looking for changes between Warlord tanking and Legion tanking, click the annotation in the video here to jump to the end of the video, where I'll cover the major changes between the two expansions. So Paladins are holy knights, or Knights if you're British, that use the power of light to defend their allies and burn their enemies. They wear heavy armor and wield shields to defend themselves, and call upon the light for healing and divine protection. Paladins are generally known for their abundance of cooldowns, giving them lots of defensive options, both large and small. Paladins and Druids are the only classes that have the versatility of doing all three roles, and Paladins retain a lot of aspects of healing and damage, even in tank form. Paladins use mana as their resource, although this is never really an issue, because you'll be regaining mana faster than you'll be able to spend it in almost all cases. That means the bigger limiting factor for Paladins are cooldowns. First, let's go ahead and discuss your basic moves. The four moves you'll be using most often are Consecration, Hammer of the Righteous, Judgment, and Avenger Shield. Consecration is your core AoE move. It places a field on the ground, dealing damage to any enemies in it constantly for its duration, which is relatively long. Better yet, if you stand in it, some of your other moves are buffed, so be sure to stay in it at all times. Hammer of the Righteous is our basic attack. If you're standing in your Consecration field, it will hit all nearby enemies instead of just a single target. So again, stay in your Consecration field at all times. You get 2 charges to use, but you should be using this just as a filler between other moves, so charges really shouldn't be a problem. Judgment is our single target damage dealer, doing a decent amount of damage and reducing the cooldown on our active mitigation ability. You should try to use this on cooldown to keep up your active mitigation as much as possible. Avenger Shield is our last basic move. It's a ranged attack that hits one target and bounces to 2 nearby targets. For those of you bad at math, that means it hits 3 targets in total. Additionally, it interrupts the cast for the primary, aka first target hit, so you can use it against casters to make sure they run to you for a few seconds. In general, you want Consecration to be on the ground and standing in the field 100% of the time, and to use Judgment on cooldown. Both of these moves will lead to better survivability more than the other moves. Avenger Shield should be used as often as possible because it will be reset constantly through one of your passives. Hammer of the Righteous should be used as a filler. Quick note here, one of the talents I will be recommending replaces Hammer of the Righteous with a different move. And that new move brings the new priority of the move up significantly, changing the order of your moves. Still, we'll talk about that during talent selection, so let's go ahead and move on. Next up is our active mitigation. Pallies have 2 forms of active mitigation, Shield of the Righteous and Light of the Protector. Shield of the Righteous is our primary damage reducer on a charge system that deals a small amount of damage to your target as well. You have 3 charges by default and they recharge after a short time. Always make sure that you use it if you're at max stacks, but you can't have it up all the time, so just use it whenever you're taking damage. Now, using Judgment will reduce the cooldown on the next charge by 3 seconds. And the cool thing is that the move is not on the same global cooldown as other moves, meaning you can even use it if you're waiting on another move or casting something else at the same time. Light of the Protector is our heal. It heals for a percentage of our missing health, meaning the lower health you are, the more it heals for. Additionally, it's on a cooldown, so the only cost of it is that cooldown. And it's also off the global cooldown, meaning that you can cast it at any time it's up, even when you're casting something else. Now, Shield of the Righteous is our proactive move, meaning you should use it before taking damage, since it's worthless afterwards. While Light of the Protector is our reactive move, meaning you should use it after taking damage because it's useless beforehand. This kind of yin and yang style makes it really pretty cut and dry how to use these abilities. Just make sure to save Light for when you're lower health, if you can, because it'll be more healing overall. Now, that covers our basic moves and active mitigation, so let's go ahead and move on to our bigger defensive cooldowns, which Paladins have quite a few of, about 6 or 7 that we'll be discussing. First is Guardian of the Ancient Kings. This is a flat 50% damage reduction for 8 seconds on a 5-minute cooldown. This is best used when you're about to take a single big hit, but could really be used at any time you're taking a lot of damage. Ardent Defender is your first game-breaking move. Now for 8 seconds, you take 20% reduced damage, and if you take fatal damage during that time, you are instantly healed back to 12% health. This should be saved for a huge damage hits, or you can use it whenever you're dangerously low on health to, do the cheat death mechanic. Really, this move has a ton of uses and can be used at any time. Just don't use it at full health, please. Now, Lay on Hands is your second game-breaking move. If you haven't noticed a trend, Pallies are kind of pretty game-breaking overall. Using this will heal your target by 100% of your maximum health instantly. Yes, you heard correctly, 100%. This means that you go from 1% to 100% instantly. Now, technically you can target others as well with this, but you're the tank, so screw them. Now, this move has the longest cooldown of like anything in the game at 10 minutes, so use it only as an emergency. Now, Blessing of Sacrifice is your save the other guy move, taking a percentage of damage away from them and attaching it onto you. Use it when you're not tanking on your other tank, or use it whenever somebody's being fixated on, to the meaning that Ad is attacking them and you cannot taunt them off. Divine Shield is our third game-breaking ability, causing you to receive 0 damage during its duration. Yeah, that's right, no damage whatsoever. Now, in the same vein, we have Blessing of Protection. This is our fourth game-breaking ability that's just like Divine Shield, but it actually can be cast on other party members, although it only stops physical damage, not all damage around, everywhere. The best use for these moves is Fixates. Basically adds that focus on a specific person in the group and can't be taunted or tanked. Blessing of Protection their target, and boom, they have 8 seconds of uninterrupted damage or healing. Now, these moves can be used as a defensive cooldown on you, but big warnings are attached to it. This will clear debuffs on you like DOTs or other bad things, meaning you can pop it and immediately cancel it to clear debuffs and continue tanking. Also, you can use it and then immediately taunt the boss, forcing it to attack you for 3 seconds, even though you're invincible. If you are invincible and you are not taunting the boss will then immediately stop attacking you because you're invincible and attack the second person. Hopefully that's another tank. If not, your healers are kind of screwed. Now, both of these moves have very advanced techniques. So for newer tanks, I would highly recommend not using these moves without a macro. Do be aware that it does exist, because even a novice can use it from time to time, such as when not actively tanking on a boss to like mitigate some AoE damage or something like casting it on your healer. Now, in addition to all these defensive moves, Pallies have several abilities to kind of help them out otherwise. Hand of Reckoning is our basic taunt move, forcing the enemy to hit us for 3 seconds and increasing threat on them by 3 times. Remember that you do actually have to hit them to keep up that threat after taunting. Divine Steed is our mobility ability, I like it, giving us an instant super fast ground mount for 3 seconds that is castable indoors and in combat. Use it to get around the battlefield whenever you need it. Avenging Wrath is our DPS cooldown, increasing all your damage and healing by a big chunk for 20 seconds. Pop this on cooldown unless the boss gets vulnerable during a specific phase or something like that, and then you can save it for that phase. Hammer of Justice is a nice single target hard stun. Use this on trash mobs, especially for a tertiary interrupt after Rebuke and Avenger Shield. Speaking of Rebuke, it is our melee range silence. Use this as needed on casters. Now, most of our cooldowns are defensive, so that's pretty much all the abilities we have. There are a few other things like Redemption for raising dead allies, and Flash of Light for some basic healing, but these pretty much should never be used in combat, so feel free to peruse your spellbook for other abilities out there. Now that we've covered all moves available to you, we can go ahead and move on to discussing talents. Paladins, like most classes, get a new talent every 15 levels from level 15 to level 90, then a final talent at 100. Tier 1 talents include Holy Shield, which increases your block chance and lets you block spells, including in top of physical attacks. Blessed Hammer, which changes your Hammer of Righteous by adding a 3rd charge and making enemies that you hit do less damage to you. And Consecrated Hammer, which lets you use Hammer of Righteous a lot more and gives bonuses even when not standing in Consecration. Now, Blessed Hammer is your go-to talent here, because of the damage reduction it will provide. It can actually hit the same group of enemies multiple times with one charge, meaning you'll actually take quite a bit less damage through it. Holy Shield is pretty good for dealing with some magic-heavy encounters, but it's generally not as good as Blessed Hammer. Consecrated Hammer really isn't good, since you should be standing in Consecration at all times anyway. Noteworthy here is that taking Blessed Hammer makes your rotation priorities change slightly. Blessed Hammer replaces Hammer of the Righteous, and turns it into an active mitigation almost, making it higher priority than your Judgment or your Avenger Shield. You want to keep the debuff on all enemies as much as possible, which should be easy given the bonus charge of the move and the multiple ticks each use. Ideally, you'll be using this in between every single other move you have, the only higher priority being to make sure Consecration is on that ground and you're standing in it. Now, Tier 2 talents includes First Avenger, which makes Avenger Shield do a bunch more damage and reset more often, but only hit one target and not bounce to multiple targets. Bastion of Light, which is a new ability that gives you 3 charges of Shield of the Righteous immediately. And Crusader's Judgment, which lets your Judgment also reset your Avenger Shield randomly, on top of just your Hammer of the Righteous resetting it. Now, Bastion of Light really is the best move here as a new defensive cooldown to immediately get more Shields of the Righteous, allowing you to do more uptime on the move for specific mechanics in a fight. The others really just increase your DPS, so they just aren't that great for tanking, unfortunately. Tier 3 talents include Fist of Justice, which lets you use Hammer of Justice more often. Repentance, which is a new CC ability that does a bunch of damage, but only to specific types of enemies, like, demons. And Blinding Light, which adds an ability to disorient everything in front of you for a few seconds. None of these matter too much, but I would recommend either Fist of Justice for easier use, or Blinding Light for AoE CC. These are really only useful on trash in most cases, so it's not a terribly meaningful choice either way. Now, Tier 4 talents include Blessing of Spell Warding, which turns Blessing of Protection, our Make Allies Invincible move, into a magical damage immunity instead of a physical damage immunity, and lowers its cooldown significantly. Cavalier, which turns our Divine Steed move into a charge move, allowing you to actually use it twice in succession if necessary. And Retribution Aura, which makes all of your allies do bonus damage when they're hit by mobs. Seeing as how they should never be hit by mobs since you're the tank, Retribution Aura is terrible, and actually should be totally avoided. Blessing of Spell Warding is my go-to talent, turning Blessing of Protection into a magical immunity defensive cooldown for you. Now, you can't cast Blessing of Protection on yourself when tanking, or the enemies will immediately start attacking your allies. But if you take this talent, you can cast it on yourself, giving yourself magical immunity for a few seconds while still being able to tank all the enemies. It's got a shorter cooldown to boot, so it's just really the best overall. Now, Cavalier has its uses if you need to get around, but I wouldn't bother with it in most cases. Go towards Blessing of Spell Warding. Tier 5 talents include Hand of the Protector, which lowers your Light of the Protector cooldown and lets you use it on others. Knight Templar, which lets you use Divine Steed more often, and adds damage reduction while you're on that steed. And Final Stand, which causes your Divine Shield to taunt all nearby enemies for 8 seconds. Now, Hand of the Protector is my go-to talent here, allowing for much more frequent heals throughout the fight. If you don't find yourself using your heal very often for whatever reason, Last Stand is a fantastic upgrade for Divine Shield, basically turning it into the best defensive cooldown in the game hands down. Immunity to damage and AoE taunt for 8 seconds? Yes, sir, may I have another? Now, Knight Templar is a good choice for mobility needs, although the damage reduction generally isn't really amazingly useful. Still, all of these talents are fantastic. As I said, I suggest Hand of the Protector for most fights, and Last Stand if you need that big cooldown during a fight. Tier 6 talents include Aegis of the Light, which is a channeled ability that reduces damage for you and all allies directly behind you by 20%. Judgment of Light, which lets any enemy you use Judgment on heal anyone who attacks them. And Consecrated Ground, which heals allies within your consecration. Now, Judgment is the best choice here. Basically, when you use Judgment on an enemy, any ally that hits that enemy gets a small amount of healing. This lasts for the next 40 attacks, but since you'll be using Judgment just about on cooldown, this won't be an issue. Aegis of the Light is a pretty good raid-wide cooldown, but A, it's not passive, and B, they have to be standing in a cone behind you to benefit from it. And I just don't like it nearly as much as the others. Now, Consecrated Ground really isn't nearly as good as Judgment in most cases, so just go ahead and go with Judgment overall. The final tier of talents includes Righteous Protector, which lowers the cooldown on your Light of Protector whenever you use Shield of the Righteous. Seraphim, which is an active that consumes all of your Shield of the Righteous charges and gives you a bunch of stats. And Last Defender, which lets you take reduced damage for each nearby enemy. More enemies equals more reduced damage. Now, Last Defender sounds great to me, but it actually isn't that great, especially for single-target bosses. Lots of ads will make it absolutely the best, but most of the time I wouldn't recommend it. Righteous Protector is the best choice here because it will let you have even more healing through that Light of the Protector. It's nice and passive too, and it comes with a bonus that I didn't mention about reducing the cooldown on Avenging Wrath, which is just gravy on top of it. Now, since Seraphim takes our Shield of the Righteous charges, it's actually not very good for survivability, regardless of stats. The only reason you would want to take it is if you're not actively tanking for a long time, so that you could use those stacks to increase your DPS with those shield charges. But this really is a terrible talent for tanking specifically. And that go ahead and covers your talents. So let's go ahead and recap. I suggest Blessed Hammer, Bastion of Light, anything in Tier 3, but maybe Blinding Light, Blessing of Spellwarding, Hand of the Protector, Judgment of Light, and Righteous Protector. As I said, the main changes are that Blessed Hammer replaces Hammer of the Righteous and goes up in priority to maintain the damage reduction buff, and Bastion of Light should be added to your defensive cooldowns on your bars. Blessing of the Spellwarding can now be used as a defensive cooldown against magic, but the rest are all passive reductions to cooldowns and increased healing. Bastion of Light technically should be added as well for trash, but really shouldn't matter much for bosses. Now finally, we're going to go ahead and discuss stats. Now, you need plate armor and you want strength and stamina, but that should be pretty much on all your pieces by default. So instead, you need to focus on the 4 secondary stats of Versatility, Haste, Mastery, and Critical Strike. Versatility increases your damage, healing, and reduces your damage taken. For Protection Paladins, this is the best stat because we have so many heals at our disposal, on top of being able to take less damage. Haste will let us use almost all of our abilities more often, which is crucial for Paladin since our whole kit is very cooldown based. Mastery increases chance to block as well as increasing your block potential from using Shield of the Righteous. This definitely helps a lot for survivability, although it doesn't help as much against magical damage. Critical Strike lets you critically heal from time to time, and also gives you a bonus parry chance. So it has its tanking uses, although not as directly as the other stats. And you'll want the stats in that order. Versatility over Haste, Haste over Mastery, Mastery over Critical Strike. Anything else is just not as good, so focus on these stats primarily in this order. And that covers all there is to know about Pallies. If you're ready to go out there and start tanking, check out my dungeon guides by clicking on the annotation in the video now. Otherwise, listen on as we discuss the major changes from WoD into Legion for Prot Pallies. So first and foremost, you'll notice Holy Power is gone. Removing that resource has some consequences, mainly the loss of Word of Glory and the major changes to Shield of the Righteous being on a charge system. We get Light of the Protector as a replacement heal for Word of Glory on a cooldown instead, so really not much to say about that. No longer do we have to decide between Hammer of the Righteous and Crusader Strike. Now it's all baked into Hammer of the Righteous. Standing in Consecration will turn your single target Hammer of the Righteous into an AoE that we know and love. Paladins finally get a movement buff in Divine Steed. It's not a charge, but it is a burst of movement speed, which is something we've been lacking for a very, very long time. A lot of our big defensive cooldowns are shaken up a bit, but the big change, I guess, would be to Divine Shield, because it doesn't reduce our damage anymore, and Blessing of the Protection, which doesn't stop the protectee from attacking. Use both of these more liberally than you did before. Now, personally, I really like the new Pallies. The simplified basic rotation, aka removal of Crusader Strike, boils everything down to stand in Consecration at all times, but we still retain tons of cooldown that cheat death. I feel Pallies are just as good as they used to be, if not more so here's hoping that the fun continues. Hopefully you liked this guide for dummies. Please like, favorite, share, subscribe, all that jazz, and as always, you keep it salty, Internet.